Hi, this is the TCH 209 tutorial for the lesson plan format. If you click on the Resources and Materials section, and scroll down to the PBA teaching cycle, click on Lesson Plan for Tutoring and download it. And opening it up here, you can see that the format is fairly straightforward, and we're going to walk through it like we did in class. So the format is to put your name of your student and your name, the grade level of your tutee, and the time that it will take for you to teach your lesson. Scrolling down, you're going to give a brief description and the context of your lesson. So kind of an overview. The goal of this lesson is to do what, and what's the context? For example, are you teaching comprehension towards your reading goals? Are you working on organization for your writing? And so forth. You'll want to list all the materials that you need to have ready for this lesson to go off successfully. Then you move to the objective section. I'd like for there to at least be 2 objectives. As a result of this lesson, the student will be able to do what at the end of your lesson. So for example, the student will be able to read a section of a picture book fluently, or a student will be able to organize their writing using a graphic organizer. Continuing down then to standards, you'll want to look at each one of your objectives and look in the Common Core standards and list any standards that can be linked to either one of your objectives. Continuing down to procedures, this is set up for reading and writing, and then the other language arts, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But within the area of reading, which I would like for you to address in part of your lesson, and then writing in part of your lesson, it's broken down into the gradual release model of teaching. So how are you going to model the strategy or skill that you're wanting the student to understand? So the teacher will and explain what you will do, and then as a group, meaning you and your student or students, what will you do together? And then how will you do further work together, perhaps a specific example. And then how are you moving the child toward independence? What are you asking them to do on their own? So an example would be for reading. If you were wanting the student to read fluently, you might say that the teacher will demonstrate an example of quote-unquote boring reading and quote-unquote exciting reading. And so you'll read an excerpt from a book in a very boring way and then in a very exciting way. And you can ask the student which one sounded better. And then they can help you brainstorm ideas about what you did during the exciting reading and say, yes, that's what we're going to learn, is how to read with good expression, good rate, and good tone, which are all elements of good fluency. So then you'll move to an activity or a strategy together that will have both of you working on good fluency together, where you could do paired reading, which is a really good strategy, where you're reading together and they are you're over-exaggerating your fluency and the student is following along with your fluency. You could do echo reading, where you read and then the student reads. And then you can move on to so that would be 2 different examples of we do. And then you can move on to asking the student to do it on their own, where perhaps during this echo reading or paired reading, you're working on reader's theater and you're reading dialogue from a picture book and you're doing it together, And then you're asking the student then, okay, now show me that you can do this on your own. What would this character sound like using these elements of good fluency? And then they would read from the book the dialogue on their own. You can have them practice multiple times just like you would in practicing a script for acting. And that incorporates repeated reading as well. So you've done paired reading, you've done echo reading, and repeated readings as the we do's, and then when they get to the you do, you're asking them to read the book on their own, and you're listening for good elements of expression, good rate, good tone, and good speed. Then you move on to writing. Same procedure. You will introduce strategies. For example, if your student is having difficulty organizing their thoughts for writing, you would talk to them about the brainstorming phase of the writing process, and you could demonstrate to them how to brainstorm an idea. So you would perhaps use yourself as an example and say, if I'm going to write a story about getting up this morning, these are all the things that I did when I got up this morning. And you could brainstorm for them using a strategy called webbing and show them the graphic organizer. Fill it out as a model for them. And then you'd move on to filling out a web together. So you would perhaps think of an idea of something that both of you have in common and web everything that both of you know about that common topic, just showing them how to get their ideas down. And then you have them choose their topic that they're wanting to write about, and you ask them to then fill out a web following your modeling and following your we do portions, filling out a web on their own in order to brainstorm for their own writing piece. You would continue to the other language arts section. You might find that some things that you did in the reading and writing portions were touching upon listening and speaking, viewing or visually representing, and so you might reiterate that and how you address that above in this section. Or if you are specifically teaching toward speaking, for example, you might indicate how you demonstrate a strategy, how you would do it together, and then how you're moving the student to independence. In the next section, the ongoing informal assessment. You're going to answer the questions. How will you know that the student met the outcomes and objectives stated above? So are you looking for them to complete their graphic organizer and fill it with elements that you demonstrated in your modeling? Are you wanting them to completely fill it out? Are you wanting them to fill it out with similar responses like you did in your example? How will you give feedback to the student regarding their progress toward meeting the objectives stated above? You would have them fill out perhaps an exit slip and then explain to you, instead of you explaining to them what they learned, make sure that they are explaining it to you. And you can use the recommended student exit slip that we've talked about in class. The accommodations, remember, are for you showing that if you were to take this lesson plan and teach it to a whole class, if you had two exceptionalities, examples of exceptionalities are students who are hard of hearing or deaf, students who have a learning disability, students who are gifted, and so on. Choose two different exceptionalities and how you would accommodate those two students with this particular lesson. For example, if a student is deaf or hard of hearing, having that graphic organizer in front of them is an accommodation because they can actually see it, even though they may not be able to hear about it. Having an FM system in your classroom would be another accommodation. The Insights into Text section, that is for whatever book that you chose in your reading section, or if you used a piece of literature as an example for your writing, or if you are multimodal and used a YouTube video, for example, or if you used some sort of photograph, whatever material that you used, you're explaining in this Insights into Text section why that material was the best choice for this particular lesson. I would like to have at least 3 to 4 to 5 sentences here, a good hefty paragraph. In the references section, I just want you to give a reference as to where you got the lesson plan idea, where you got the strategy idea. It can be from an academic resource. You maybe got an idea from your mom, who's a second grade teacher. Wherever you got it, just cite that here. Now, before I move on, I do want to show you, for the informal assessment, this how will I give feedback to my student, I'd like to show you where that student slip is. If you were to scroll to your reflection, so here's daily tutoring reflection for you as a teacher candidate, but then here's the student self-reflection. And this could be an informal way of assessing your student. And you open that up as part of your assessment for the day. And you can have the student write or explain to you the skill they are currently working on. This is for them to reflect on. This will show you if they truly understand what it is that you've presented to them and they know what it is they were getting out of the lesson, how they feel about their knowledge of the skill, and they can rate it from 0 to 4. And then I can show evidence of this skill. What are ways that they can show that they understand what it is they've learned? And I feel that my next step needs to be, and maybe they feel they'll need to review it again, or they're ready to move on. I recommend modeling how to fill this out the first several times that you ask the student to do this. But it's very informative, and it's good to teach them self-reflection so that they can explain to you what it is they've learned, and you can plan accordingly on your next lesson plan. All right, good luck, folks, writing your lesson plans.